Right. So beforehand, we had our simple Keynesian model. Now, simple Keynesian model had to deal with the following. It was your, once again, in equilibrium, A is equal to Y. All right. And we realize that A in this case is equal to C plus I. Right. And as a result of that, that would then turn to autonomous level C, or autonomous consumption, plus induced consumption, plus autonomous investment spending. And we realize that Y is also equal to exactly the same thing, being autonomous consumption plus induced income plus autonomous investment spending. But then we also took it a notch higher and we looked at how do we get to equilibrium? How do we get to equilibrium when it comes to your income or production? And we realized, and I'm just doing it the short way, that this was your multiplier, which is 1 over 1 minus C, multiplied by your autonomous spending. And in this case, when we talked about autonomous spending, this was equal to autonomous consumption plus autonomous investment spending. All right, just give me a thumbs up if you remember that. Today, we just take it one notch higher. Awesome, Abigail. Seeing that we're only 6, I'll just have 2 people that at least put their thumbs up, and then we'll take it from there. Anybody else remember this? Awesome, Kian. So like I said, we're taking it up a notch. And now we're going to introduce government spending. So our A this time around will then change from your normal A is equals to C plus I. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have plus G, which is government spending. In your textbooks on page 380, I want you to highlight the following. Be under 18.1, the sentence just before the 3 bullet points. It says the inclusion of government means that we have to consider the impact of government spending G and taxes T on 1, the aggregate level of aggregate spending A, 2, the multiplier, and 3, the income, the equilibrium income as well. So when we add government sector, in this case, we're looking at that as well. Now, what's very important to also understand about G, and I'll use another color for this. Just have a look and keep your eye on the board in this regard. We're adding government spending. And we're also adding, in this case, taxes. Now tell me, off of the stuff that we've done so far, when it comes down to government spending and taxes, what policy do we have that deals with government spending and taxes? What policy do we have that deals with government spending and taxes? What policy do we have that deals with government spending and man, Abigail, you go. 100%. So we have the fiscal policy. So if we start hearing about fiscal policy in this regard, guys, we're looking at government spending and taxes and how that obviously will influence this as a whole, right? Still highlighting you'll find on government spending, still on page 380, this government spending is essentially a political issue, right, in bold. That's on 380. It says the following. The important point is that government spending is essentially a political issue. And we talked about this in government when we're dealing with just the government as a whole. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to government spending, it's about your politicians and your bureaucrats. It's got nothing to do with the income. It's got everything to do with just political decisions. Whoever is in power as a political party, they'll basically let us know what their ambitions are via how they're going to spend money, via the budget speech that is normally given in February. And it says, in other words, government spending is related to political objectives rather than to the level of income. In fact, government spending G has often been increased after income Y has fallen. Interesting. There is no systemic relationship between government spending and income or production. The symbols we express this as is G is equal to government spending with a bar, showing that obviously when it comes down to government spending as a whole, it is autonomous. It is not reliable on income. And in figure 18.1, we see government spending there being autonomous to your total income. And we've seen this graph before. Where we've seen this graph before has been investment spending, which is obviously autonomous from income and is dependent on interest rates. So really there we're beginning to start getting some sort of feedback as to, wait a second, we have now 3 different autonomous spending patterns. We've got your consumption spending, which is autonomous. We've also got your investment spending, which is autonomous. And then we've also got your government spending, which is autonomous right now. Now, based on what we've done before, tell me, when it comes down to government spending, right, does it increase your total product and income? Or does it decrease your total product and income? As soon as we add government spending, are we increasing your total product and income, or are we decreasing your total product and income? Let me know in the chat. Sure, Abigail, with pleasure. So in this case, remember, we're dealing with your government spending, and we're talking about autonomous government spending in this case. So the question that I'm asking is that when it comes down to your aggregate spending, let me ask you, start there. When it comes down to your aggregate spending, are we increasing your aggregate spending based on the addition of government spending, or are we decreasing aggregate spending based on your government spending? Absolutely. So we increase your aggregate spending, and as a result of increasing your aggregate spending, we also increase total product and income as well. Okay, so I want you guys to take that into consideration. Now, what's important about this, guys, is the following, and I want you to look at figure 18.2. What you're going to see, guys, is that there's going to be a consistent pattern here, right? A consistent pattern. This is when this actually becomes very easy. Personally, I think chapter 17 was the more difficult approach. Chapter 18 just simply builds on what it is that you already know. Okay, so we've got your x-axis, and then we've got your y-axis. Your y-axis in this case being aggregate spending, and your x-axis being income. Now, before, the idea that we were introduced to was your aggregate, sorry, your autonomous spending is equals to autonomous spending plus autonomous investment spending. And we had our graph where we had A, is equals to C plus I. But now that we've added government spending, then we have A is equals to, and we're talking about autonomous spending, is equals to autonomous consumption spending, autonomous investment spending, and autonomous government spending as well. And therefore, there's an increase in aggregate spending. And all I'm doing, Abigail, right now, and everybody else, is that I'm taking the words that we've received so far from the textbook and we're just putting it into a graphical representation. And then this becomes A is equals to C plus I, and you won't believe it, plus G. And this change is simply because of government spending. Now, remember that we have what we call a 45-degree line, and this 45-degree line that we're going to use will just basically be just letting us know what's happened to the equilibrium point as a result of government spending. We have a 45-degree line over here, and we realize that this 45-degree line indicates one thing and one thing alone, that at the end of the day, your aggregate spending is equals to your income or production. So we'll find that at Y1, we were producing at a certain level, or we're having a certain income at a certain level. But as soon as you look at the next equilibrium point, we then have Y2. This is E2, and this is E1. And this is how we see that there has been obviously an increase in income, but there's also been an increase obviously in aggregate spending as well. Right? Are there any questions around this, guys? Please ask now, because everything is just basically an addition to this. And remember, we've just dealt with in government spending, we've just dealt with the autonomous government spending. We still need to put taxes into this as well. So in the chat, let me know whether you are good to go. Give me a thumbs up. If not, now's the time to ask questions. Okay. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. So let's move on to page 382. Page 382. Now, guys, you will remember how we derived your equilibrium level of income, right? It was autonomous, or rather not autonomous, it was your multiplier multiplied by your autonomous consumption spending plus your autonomous investment spending plus your autonomous government spending. Now, before, all we did, guys, is that we only had C plus I, but now we have added government spending as well, right? And therefore, the end result here is obviously your multiplier times your autonomous spending. But now we've added G. We've added government spending to this. Right. So what I want you guys to highlight on page 382 is the following. It'll be the bullet points with the bits right up top it. Right. It just says there, the impact of government spending G may also be summarized by considering three aspects mentioned at the beginning of this section. The introduction of government spending G results in a higher level of aggregate spending A, leaves the multiplier unchanged, and results in a higher equilibrium of income 0, or in this case, equilibrium income, ceteris paribus. Please highlight that. That stuff is gold, absolute gold. Then the next bit that I'd want you guys to highlight still on page 382, will be the bold bit that has increases in government spending can be used to raise the level of production and income. Why? And remember, this is why government essentially spends, because they sit down and they go, guys, we obviously need to increase the total output of the country. And as a result, we have to, by all means, ensure that government starts spending a whole lot more. So Pang has asked, fifth edition, anyone knows the page? Please, if someone does know the page, be of assistance in that regard. But we're here now. Awesome, Kian. Thanks. Okay, so we're now done with government spending. But remember, we're dealing with fiscal policy. And as a result of dealing with fiscal policy, there's a tax element that we also need to be looking into. There's a tax element that we also need to be looking into. So still on page 382, under taxes, it says the following. And I want you to highlight this word for word. It says, if government wishes to spend, it should levy taxes. In the circular flow model introduced in chapter 3, we emphasize that government spending G is an injection in the circular flow of income and spending in the economy. We also indicated that taxes T constitute a leakage or withdrawal from the circular flow. We therefore expect that the impact of taxes would be the opposite of the impact of government spending G. As a general principle, this is indeed the case, but there is a subtle difference between the impact of T, which is taxes, and the impact of G, which is government spending. And I'll say double underline the next couple of sentences. Whereas government spending affects the level of spending and income in a direct way. And we saw this via the increase in aggregate spending and via the increase in income and production. By adding to the demand for goods and services, taxes operate in a more indirect fashion. Taxes reduce the income that households have available to spend on goods and services. We say that taxes reduce disposable income or after-tax income of households, with the result that households can afford to purchase fewer goods and services than before. By reducing disposable income, taxes indirectly reduce consumption spending C by households. In this case, government spending G, we wish to know how the introduction of taxes will affect the level of aggregate spending A, the size of the multiplier, and the equilibrium level of income. Then I want you to shift all the way down to not autonomous. You'll find that in bold. Just a sentence before that, it says the following. We therefore cannot realistically assume that taxes T are unrelated to income, right? And we realize this because when we talked about taxes beforehand, when we talked about things like the monetary policy and so forth, we realize that when it comes on to taxes, the more you earn, the more taxes you obviously pay. So there's a direct relationship between what I earn and obviously my taxes as well. Now it says there, we therefore cannot realistically assume that taxes T are unrelated to income Y. T is clearly not autonomous, as with the case with government spending. To be realistic, we have to assume a link between taxes T and income Y. We therefore assume that taxes are a certain proportion, small t, to income. This proportion is called the tax rate. Right? And then figures 18.3 under taxation as a function of income. First and foremost, what's important about this function around taxes is the following. You've got your T, which is obviously your taxes. Then we've got your small t, which is now obviously the tax rate at that point in time. And then you've got your income. Now I always use the example of 30,000. So if we say that the taxable income for 30,000 is say 20%, right? Which is 0.2. We then multiply that by 30,000 and tell me when you do the maths on your calculators, what answer do you get? 6,000. All right. So we see here that there's a positive relationship between these two, right? And therefore you find that when it comes down to your graph, taxation as a function of income, you have a positive sloping curve, a positive sloping curve. So just take that into consideration. But let's continue to highlight. It has the total income Y in bold at the bottom of page 383. Total income in bold. It says we must therefore distinguish between total income Y and disposable income YD. Disposable income YD is simply the income that households have available after they've paid taxes. And then we have our algebra once again. And all that basically putting across in simple English. I'm just going to put a dash here to show that we're doing a new idea, is that your disposable income is equals to what your income is minus your taxes. Then the next bit is that we know what T is. And T in this case is equals to Y minus T, which is T Y. Now, factorization then lets us know that your Y would then stay outside and then would have 1 minus T on the inside. And this is what your disposable income is equal to. Just let me know in the chat whether you're still good, whether you're still following on. Just give me a thumbs up. The rabbit hole is about to get deeper. Awesome, Abigail. Everybody else? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to use another color for this. Awesome. Now remember, we also spoke about consumption earlier on, and we said that consumption in this case is autonomous spending plus your multiplier and whatever your disposable income would be at that point in time. But now we understand what your disposable income is in this case. Your disposable income is Y times 1 minus T. So therefore this then changes, your consumption function then changes to C bar plus your autonomous consumption function multiplied by Y minus T Y. Right, and all we've done here, guys, is that we've just done the multiplication for this. Now, once again, if we do a bit of factorization, this is what we end up with. We end up with autonomous consumption is plus your marginal propensity to consume one minus T multiplied by your, at that point in time, your income. Now onto the new next page. I'm just going to raise the board now. Now you guys will remember that our multiplier in this case is your 1 minus 1 minus C. right? But now, because of this introduction of your taxes, this now changes to 1 over 1 minus C multiplied by 1 plus T. Sorry, minus T, I mean to say. Now, basically, this is our new multiplier now with taxes involved. Now, as a result of this, what ends up happening is that as a whole, your multiplier then begins to start decreasing because you find that the denominator is now obviously increasing. Okay, so as a result, your multiplier obviously begins to start decreasing. Now, in your book, I want you to highlight the following on page 384 under important note. When calculating the multiplier with taxes, the calculation in brackets 1 minus t must be made first. The result of this calculation is then multiplied by the marginal propensity to consume, C, and only then is the subsequent result subtracted from 1 and inverted, divided into 1 to obtain the multiplier, right? This is just another fancy way of basically saying the BODMAS, brackets over division, then multiplication, addition, and subtraction. That's basically what they're putting across. And we're going to obviously work through some material to show that. All right. Now, moving on to page 384, still on the right side, we find these 3 bullet points. And this is actually where the gold of this specific idea is. The introduction of proportional tax thus leaves autonomous spending unchanged, right? And the reason why it leaves autonomous spending unchanged is because it deals with the gradient being the marginal propensity to consume, right? AKA deals with also the multiplier, right? Then the next thing goes into talking about reduces the multiplier. And we realize that because the denominator is now increased by number. Then the last bit is that we're now looking at the third bullet point that says the following, right? And it says reduces the equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus, right? And this is basically because of the decrease in your equilibrium spending or in your equilibrium income. Now, just let me know off the bat whether we're still in one accord. Give me a thumbs up if that's the case. If not, now's the time for you to give me a shout. Awesome, Abigail. Everybody else? And yes, I know this is new information, so it will take some time to settle in. But my big question is, are you following through? So we've got Abigail and we've got Charlize. Mazini, let me know what's happening with you. Kian, Lee, Leon, Mazini, Tiamo, let me also know. Okay? All right, cool. So now we need to graphically obviously represent this, right? And I think that the second graph on page 18.4b obviously shows that, in the first bit there, I'll just draw this. I know Kian will probably ask me to do so. In the first graph, we had your normal consumption function, which is 0, and we had your income on y, and then we had your C as well, and then we had your normal consumption function here. But now we've introduced taxes, and as a result of introducing taxes, the gradient has fallen because we've got less money to obviously consume. Right? And therefore your change in C is basically your autonomous consumption plus your induced consumption, which in this case now you've added your taxes towards. That's your consumption function, which is what graph A is obviously putting across. Now graph B, the only difference here with graph B is that now we're looking at aggregate spending as a whole, and how we obviously show this on aggregate spending. So once again, we see your aggregate spending on your y-axis. On your x-axis, we see income. Your aggregate spending in this case, right, and I'll put there just on the side that this is inclusive of C plus I plus G, all autonomous values. That is obviously then A plus, or is equals to autonomous level C plus CY plus I bar plus G bar. But now remember, we've introduced our taxes, and therefore we have your autonomous spending plus your introduction of taxes. So we put your marginal propensity to consume multiplied by 1 minus T with your income plus I plus G, both autonomous values. And now all we're doing, guys, here is that we're basically just showing that at the end of the day, what this does for us, this taxes, is that it reduces your aggregate spending, and it also reduces your total income as a whole. And this is obviously shown by the following 45-degree line. Where your first, which is equilibrium, was at y1, now it's at y2. And those are the bullet points that we've had. Basically being illustrated in your graph, that it leaves autonomous spending unchanged. It reduces the multiplier and reduces the equilibrium level of income. Now remember, your autonomous spending is basically your C bar plus I bar plus G bar. So those are obviously, those remain the same. But what changes is obviously your multiplier, which reduces, and also your equilibrium level of income, which also reduces as well. Now on page 386, we then see everything into action. 386 is a very good summary of what's going on, right? Page 386, you'll have in bold algebraically, it says, algebraically, we can have the following model. Your income is equals to your aggregate spending, which is equal to your consumption plus your autonomous investment spending plus your autonomous government spending, right? And we realize that C in this case is, which is your consumption function, now has your taxes involved as well, right? And if we just skip over to the next bit, still on page 286 on the right side, we'll have an interesting equation there. Remember that equation has more or less remained exactly the same from what we've had before. All we've done now is that our multiplier has taxes involved and our aggregate spending has government spending involved. What I want you to highlight is the point just above the bullet points that says the following. The equilibrium level of income can always be obtained by multiplying autonomous spending by the multiplier. All that changes when government spending is introduced is that autonomous spending A has additional component G. The multiplier becomes smaller, thus reducing the induced consumption. And then on our right side, page 387, it has the Keynesian model with a government sector, right? And that's a good summary as well. I'll highlight those bullet points and I'll just repeat it here. And I know there's a lot of repetition that has obviously happened, but remember, repetition in this case ensures that the impression deepens as well. And it says that the introduction of government spending increases autonomous aggregate spending and raises the equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus. The increase in income is a multiple of the change in autonomous spending. That is, government spending has a multiplier effect on income. Government spending does not, however, affect the size of the multiplier. And the next bit, the introduction of proportional income tax reduces the size of the multiplier and therefore reduces the equilibrium level of income, ceteris paribus. Such a tax affects spending and income indirectly via its influence on disposable income. Right. Almost done, guys, almost done. Then we have your exercise there in box 18.1. And we'll do this just before the break, and then we'll get into the foreign sector thereafter. And it says, suppose a small economia, that's a terrible name, but anyhow, originally exists only of households and firms. There's no government and there's no trade links with the rest of the world. The currency is in the econ. Autonomous consumption is 10 million econs per year, and the household consumed is 60% or 0.6 of each addition to their income. Firms spend 30 million econs on capital goods each year. That is, in the investment spending is 30 million econs per year. Right. And what I'll do on the side, whilst obviously these people are giving me these digits, is that I'll first see that, oh, okay, in this specific example, right, it says here there's only households and firms. And tell me, what are the symbols for households and firms? Only households and firms. Let me know in the chat. What are the symbols for only households and firms? What are the symbols for only households and firms? Abigail, Shalise, Kia, Lee, Leon, Mazini, talk to me. What are the symbols for households and firms? The algebraic symbols for households and firms. Somebody talk to me. Households and firms. Okay. In this case, it's not N. No, that's fine, Abigail. That's fine. Like I said, the point within this is a safe environment for us to obviously do our mistakes, so that when we finally get to our exam or our test, we obviously are more enlightened in that regard. So don't worry about getting it wrong. The point is to get it wrong here so that we can get it right elsewhere. Right. So the symbol for households and firms in this case, guys, is C for households, and firms is I. So in this case, when we talk about a household that only has, or sorry, an economy that only has um, your households and firms, we're talking about C and I, and therefore our aggregate spending is equals to C plus I, right? Where in this case, C is your consumption function, which is C, autonomous consumption, plus induced consumption, plus autonomous investment spending. So when we look at this specific bit here, we now begin to start asking ourselves the question, okay, great, what are they looking for in this regard? What are they looking for in this regard? So we continue to read. It means that C is equals to 10 million. So we realize that when it comes to our line, your autonomous function, so your autonomous consumption is 10 million. Your induced or your marginal propensity to consume, according to box 18.1, is 0.6 multiplied by Y. And then your I in this case, guys, is 30 million. I'm not going to put the extra zeros because we know that they exist. We're just basically focusing on what's in front of us. Now, in this case, what they're basically going to ask us is that we need to figure out what the equilibrium is. And we realize from before, equilibrium in this case is 1 over 1 minus C multiplied by your autonomous spending, which is this case is just C plus I. And if you put these together, and just follow with me, if you put these together, it's 1 over 1 minus 0.6 multiplied by 30 plus 10. Let's break it down even further. 1 minus 0.6 is 0.4, so 0.4 over 1 multiplied by 40. Stay with me still. And in your calculators, what I'd want you guys to equate for me before we go into our break, and I know that we're due for that right now, I'll add an extra minute, is what's 40 divided by 0.4? Let me know in the chat. What's 40 divided by 0.4? Absolutely, Abigail. Absolutely, Kian. Good stuff. Good stuff. Lee, you're usually on the money with this as well, but I won't pick on you yet. I won't pick on you yet. So we've got 100 million, and this is our equilibrium income for now. Guys, in the second bit, we're now going to add our taxes and government spending to this as well. So let's get that 10-minute break in. We'll start promptly at 1 minute past 11.